All right, good morning. Doc D here. And so today we're going to talk about, actually we're going to we're going to introduce the concept of modeling systems. And we're going to start off with the most basic one, and we're going to look at what's called the context diagram. All right, and so first we'll talk a little bit about um, why we want to model a system. All right, so a model creates basically a universal language, right? It creates a schematic, a blueprint um, of a system. And so the power of this is that it could be a physical system, it could be a computer system with a logic flow, um, or some other phenomenon. And so we can use this modeling to describe a lot of different things, and it also helps us examine. It gives us a framework to examine uh, the system that we're looking at. And then, as we get further into this, we'll not only be examining, the system, but we'll actually be breaking it apart into different pieces and parts, so we can look at those and how they work. Um, all right, so let's see. So we were all familiar with math models. We all had some level of math to get here in college. Some of us may have liked it, some may not. So, math is a model, right? It gives us something that we can utilize to actually model uh, physical laws. And an example would be E equals mc squared, the model of conversion to mass energy. All right, who's responsible for that? Einstein. All right, so here you are. You're doing Einstein level of math. Woohoo! All right. So a diagram is basically taking a model and we are putting it on a two-dimensional plane. And so, examples of that would be a drawing, sketch, a plan or blueprint. Um, and it's designed to demonstrate how something works or to show its relationship with other things. And so the very first thing that we'll talk about is the context diagram, and we examine the relationship of the system with its environment. All right. And so as we go through different modeling systems, different modeling concepts, all right, they'll look at different things. And so here we go. All right, so why model? And so everything is really complex. Even the most basic system that we utilize on a day-to-day basis is really quite complex. Um, and even if we look at our own daily routine, all right, it can be quite complex because you probably do a lot of the same things day in and day out, and don't even really pay much attention to what you're doing within that little system, right? But there are other things that interact with your system, and so this whole modeling process allows us to examine, again, from the big picture, all the environment, all the things that interact with your system, all right, and then we'll actually get down to looking at component level and what we do the state diagram. All right, and so modeling allows us, as I said in an earlier lecture, to communicate in essentially a universal language, right? All of these modeling systems um, have contextual cues or clues, in that we use specific um, we use specific shapes and we use specific formations to represent different things, and so that um, you can communicate uh, a very complex system to somebody else who doesn't speak the same language, right? And so that's kind of the beauty of this, is that we are able to communicate very, very complex stuff um, in an almost universal language. All right. Models also allow us to um, simulate things and to manipulate things before we commit a lot of time and energy and resources, you know. And as I said early on, everything is about dollars. Okay, dollars rules the world, and you know we'd like it to be somewhat other than that, but it is. You know, everything that we do is about money, and so you know we're going to school to get a job so that we can make a decent living and we can support ourselves and our family, right? So you know, and again, my whole philosophy on this, I come from a more of a manufacturing background, and so that's really my viewpoint that I use, my perspective that I bring to this, is that you know it's all about money. It's all about saving money, making things more efficient, right? And so, if I'm able to use a model to examine a theory and how it might relate to other things, rather than to go out and do a full-blown, you know, hey, we're going to change everything within this system and not really know whether it's going to work or not, that gets to be very, very expensive. All right, so modeling allows us to examine different approaches, and you know we can do statistical analysis off of some of these as well. And again, you know, it's all about money. So we're trying to get the most bang for the buck, and we're trying to be efficient in what we do. That's the overall goal. All right, allows us to sell the customer on what it is that we're doing. Again, one of the things that a recurring topic that I will have throughout our lectures is that a lot of times our customer who brings us their problem really doesn't fully understand what their problem is, right? All they know is that, you know, something's not working the way that they want it to. Now, it may be working just fine, but it's not working the way that they want it to. And so that creates problems for our customers. So by using these models and schematics and you know, the modeling concepts that we're going to learn, we're going to be able to talk to our customer. We're going to be able to show them in a method that they can understand. All right, because we're going to find out later on in the semester that, you know, our customer is going to be the approver, right? They're the one who's funding this, and so that customer can be a lot of different people, right? It can be your own company is the customer, or it can be an external entity, and you might be your own customer because you're trying to design something and you're establishing what it is that you want it to do, right? And so you can be your own customer. It also allows a framework for team members to work together. All right, and so again, what it does is it clarifies boundaries, and we'll talk a lot more about boundaries as we get into the lecture. But it clarifies boundaries, it establishes boundaries, and so that allows team members to work effectively within those boundaries. And when I say boundaries within the system. When we get to the cross-functional process map here in a few days, you know, we'll be changing the boundaries to examine different things, different aspects within a system. All right, for the context diagram, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit, the boundary is established at whatever has an input or an output to a system, right? And we'll talk about that here in just a second. All right, so as I said earlier, you know, the goal here is to create, you know, essentially a method of transferring a lot of information with minimal diagramming, I guess. And so, you know, the old adage is that a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? And that's so true. All right. So we create a diagram or our model, because these models that we're doing are all diagrams for what we're doing. They're all diagrams. And so what we want to do is we want to have a model that's very clear and concise, all right, but we don't want to clutter it up, right? And so it is a visual representation, and we're going to use specific verbiage in when we construct our models, our diagrams, right? Verbiage does count. Verbiage is important. As I said earlier, you know, we're going to be using different shapes, colors, and different types of lines to represent different things. And so when we do that, we want to be consistent in how we do things, so that as we are talking to our audience or talking to our teammates or our customer, you know, that we have a consistent message across the board. All right, so just a reach forward in that Systems 401 and Systems 402 are all about creating detailed models, right? And simulating reality and all that good stuff. So not something you really need to worry about or think about today, but you know, what we're teaching in this course is really basic entry-level stuff, and it's foundational. So the terms, the concepts that you learn here will be carried forward all the way through the systems curriculum. All right, some of the things that we're going to model. We're going to model processes, and right now you're probably, well, I don't even know what a process is, or a function. All right, well, you've probably had functions in algebra way back when, right? I can still remember doing functions in 7th grade, I think. But these are things that happen within a system, and so you know, I'm getting the cart just a little bit before the horse, but that's okay. So we're going to start introducing some terminology here. So processes or functions are things that occur within a system. You know, they're actions that occur. Interactions, and so, you know, if we have different processes or functions, then we're going to have interactions as things move from one process or function or one system component to another, or a subcomponent. We're going to have interactions, right? They don't just mysteriously appear from one place to another. They have to get there in some way, right? And so those are called interactions. All right. Data. So the data is focused more on the computer science side of this, but it's also still important because we can represent data flow through a system very, very easily. And so, you know, even though the vast majority of what we do is not going to be super computer science related, as we get towards the end of the semester, we'll have a lot more computer science related stuff. But as of right now, it's just basic concepts, right? But you know, we can do the same things with data. All right, and then flow, and that flow can be the flow of data, or it could be the movement of goods, whatever, through processes, right? So our system is going to be doing different things to inputs. If you recall on the very first slide, or not the very first slide, but the very first lecture, I said, you know, if you remember nothing else, it's that you know, it basically, we have a system that has inputs, some kind of processes happening to it, and then those inputs are changed, right? And they come out the other side as a changed medium of some sort or another. All right. And so these are all the different things that we can look at modeling within our system. All right. So this slide, everybody really should just print this slide out and memorize it. And again, I'm not a person who believes in rote memorization, but this is one that you need to do that because you will see this slide frequently. All right, because I'm going to ask you just about every quiz, just about every major quiz or test. This slide will be on there, and I'm going to ask you because I want you to commit this to memory. All right, so what we have here are the 4 different modeling systems that we're going to use, the 4 different modeling diagrams that we're going to use, right? And so the very first one that we're going to talk about is the context diagram. If you look over to the left here, all right, this is at system level. All right, and so the context diagram is the most wide-looking diagram that we're going to use, right? And so we're going to talk about it here in just a minute. So great big, we're looking super wide. And in fact is we're looking so wide that when we're looking at the actual system itself, all we see is the system. We don't see anything below the system itself, and we're looking at inputs and outputs of that system. All right, and so this sets the scope of the system, and we'll talk about that here in just a few minutes. All right, the cross-functional process map, or otherwise known as the swim lane diagram, all right, basically shows workflow, all right, as things come through different functions or functional areas, if you will. And we'll talk a lot about that with the fast food restaurant, simply because we're all familiar with fast food, unfortunately, but we are. And so it's something that you can think about and kind of see, and probably several of you have worked in fast food, and so a lot of this stuff I think will make sense to you. All right, detailed process, the flow chart just looks at, where the workers perform, what kind of work. All right, and then when we get down to the component level, we're going to be talking about the state diagram, all right? And the state diagram, I don't want to get too much into it now, because people tend to get wrapped around the axle on a state diagram, and it's something that's really, really simple. All right, so each of these, the context diagram, we've got a really wide lens, all right? And then we come into this cross-functional process map, or the swim lane diagram, and we start narrowing down our focus, and now we're looking at, within our system, we're looking at functions and how things flow through those functions, right? Then we look at the flow chart, and we think of the flow chart as a logic diagram, and that's probably the best thing. And then the state diagram just talks about the state of a particular component, and we'll discuss that much later on in the semester. All right, so here we go. With all that preamble, we're finally at the crux of the lecture for the day. All right, and so again, the take-home for this lecture is, print out that slide that had our 4 different diagrams that we're going to utilize, and memorize it. All right, so the context diagram basically establishes the scope of a system. And so what we're looking at is that, what is the system boundaries? What entails the system, right? And so we're going to draw a big oval around our system, all right? And that's going to be the boundary. And then we're looking at what are the inputs and outputs and the entities that it interacts with. And so again, I use fast food restaurant as an example for many of these things, just because we've all had experience with them. All right, and so if we look at the fast food restaurant, and I'm looking at it as a system, and so I might just say, well, everything within the building comprises the fast food restaurant. All right, and that's a fair thing. All right, and it could be argued that we could include the parking lot. You could, whatever, it's splitting hairs. All right, and so what this does is that we're saying that anything outside the walls of the restaurant is not part of the system. And so now we want to look at things that come into and go out of that system. And in this case, what are the things that go into the building and out of the building? And so, for example, what are the things that we think about most frequently? Well, you have customers coming in, right? Customers come in, food goes out. All right, but what are all the things that are going into that system that allow the food to be prepared, right? So we've got, electricity, gas, water, sewer, all right? Probably have internet too, because everything's got internet these days. So those are all things that are coming in and going out of that building. All right, how about raw materials? And so we've got raw hamburger patties, we got buns, we've got condiments, you know, so you got tomatoes, you got lettuce, you got onions, you got pickles, you got all that stuff that's coming in. You know, you've got grease for the fryers, you have frozen fries. All that stuff are inputs into that system, right? Well, we have employees, right? Employees have to go in there and input as well, right? Dollars. Our customers spend dollars, and we also have dollars going out, right? Because we're paying bills, all right? Plus, you know, if we're giving change, that's an output, all right? And so you can see that, you know, even with this really wide lens, this can get really, it can cover a lot of different things. And so the power of using these is that we can narrow our lens down on any one of these to look at something particular. So if I wanted to just look at, say, external entities that that would be considered overhead, right? And so what is overhead? So, you know, if they've got a mortgage on the building, you know, electricity, gas, all that stuff, I could say, okay, so we're going to do a context diagram, and we're going to look at, you know, those overhead type items. And so that specifies that I don't necessarily have to worry about the hamburgers and all that good stuff, but, you know, all I'm focused on is those overhead type things. Or I might say that for the purposes of this context diagram, I'm going to focus on raw materials and food out. All right, and so again, I can narrow that lens down, and this is the really powerful thing about this, is that, you know, I can narrow that down and look at specifics. All right, so the context diagram, usually, you know, when we're first starting to get to know a system, we want to learn about that system, right? We want to learn about, you know, what are the boundaries of that system. We want to learn what are all the things that it takes for that system to operate, to be effective, to do what it does. All right, and then we also want to know, you know, well, what's the output? And so, you know, another output of a restaurant that we probably don't think about is trash. You know, there's a whole lot of trash that comes out of a restaurant every single day. All right, so when we're first getting acquainted with the system, right, we're gonna probably do this context diagram so that we understand all of the things that feed into that, all those things that have an influence. And basically what we're looking at is this thing called the environment that our system lives in. All right, let's see. All right, and so, you know, this helps us talk to stakeholders or customers about the system boundaries, you know, where those system boundaries are and what are the things that cross those boundaries, and you know, why do we need to be alert? Why do we need to be concerned about those? Well, because, you know, if you're going to start a new business, you need to understand all of the things that go into that business and all of the things that go out of that business, right? Because if you don't understand that, you're not going to have a successful business model, because you're not taking into account all of the things that you need to. All right, using the early phase of the project to agree on the scope of the system. Again, you know, once we're getting our initial introduction to a system, this is really typically where we do this. This is where we gain a more better understanding of where that system lives and you know, what that environment is. Right. Okay. Wow. Big typo there. I've been using this slide forever and I didn't see that. All right. So here is the real basic context diagram, right? And so we have the system there in the circle, all right? And then we have inputs with the arrow in, and then you see we have the external entities in boxes, right? And so, so an example here would be utilities, all right? And so there would be different inputs coming out of in utilities, all right? And so, you know, we'd have gas, sewer, all that good stuff, all right? So those are all things going in, and then we're also going to have output, right? So what are the output from some of those same things, right? Well, if it goes in, then it's probably going to be coming out in some form or another. Um, even electricity goes in. Well, what goes out? Well, there's no direct out on that one, but it does contribute to all the things that are going on, right? One of the most important things about the context diagram, and this is something that people seem to miss frequently, all right, is that it does not look internal to the system, right? The closest we get to the system is we have the system named, and we set our boundaries, and that's it, right? We don't look at anything within that system. All we're concerned with is the inputs and outputs and those external entities that are either giving the inputs or taking the outputs. All right, so here's one. So we have a bookstore. So we've got the customer brings money in. All right, supplier brings books in. Utilities bring electricity in. All right, and then out the other side, we have books and a receipt go back to the customer. Trash goes out, and it goes to waste management. Money goes out, and it goes to the bank. All right, and this is just a really, really basic one, like I said. And again, if we wanted to look at, utilities, we could break this down. We could take this utility here, and we could break it out into the different utilities, right? And we can look at all those different things that go in, and then what's the output of that. So again, the simple context diagram just allows us to look at the system as a whole and where it lives, and those things that contribute to it and the things that it contributes to. All right, and again, most importantly about this is that we don't look inside the system. We don't care about what's going on inside the bookstore at this point. All right, we just want to know what are the inputs and the outputs. All right. So where are we at here? 27 minutes. All right. Okay, so short lecture. Usually I do some writing on the board and stuff, but I couldn't be in class this morning, so recorded this. If you have questions, feel free to email me. I will have access to my email through the weekend. And please don't forget that you have a homework assignment. The 5 systems assignment is due Sunday night at 11 p.m. All right, God bless. Everybody have a great weekend, and I will see you on Monday. Doc D out.